Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 5, 8 and a half, your midweek break. I'm Lisa Graves, and I'm here along with Nadine Smith. And we also want to do another shout out to Greg O'Lear and LB for inviting us to host this Wednesday night show. And we definitely want to urge you to watch and share their Friday night hang from last week and this coming Friday. Nadine?
Well, hey there. You know what? I'm starting to really love the theme music. Is that wrong? I just find myself rocking out to it.
Me too.
It's great to see you, and I cannot wait for this show, the 100 Days show. But before we even get a chance to talk about the first 100 days, we have to talk about this really odious headline. The Billionaires Club that has been started in Washington, D.C. Okay, so first you have to understand, this is a private club launched by Donald Jr. and an investor named Omid Malik, and it is called the Executive Branch. I mean, they're just waving it in our faces that they have purchased the presidency. And if Omid Malik sounds familiar to you, he is the guy whose Wall Street career imploded after a bunch of female colleagues, including subordinates, accused him of unwanted sexual advances and inappropriate conduct. So the Bank of America investigates, they fire him, and his case becomes like the national symbol of the Me Too movement and its long overdue reckoning with Wall Street. So he sues Bank of America, but his name is sort of linked with the Harvey Weinstein, Steve Wynn as poster children for finance's Me Too moment. So he leverages this notoriety and he pivots hard into the MAGA business world and becomes like this major financier and business partner to Tucker Carlson, like this huge $15 million investment in Carlson's new media company. And he launches his own anti-ESG, right? So this is him going after ESG companies that care about the environment, care about climate change, social justice, good governance, all of these things. And so he launches this to go after any kind of corporate social responsibility. There could not be a more appropriate mascot for the executive branch. And he boasts openly about, that he is going after DEI and really going after anything that was gained during the Me Too movement to call into account. So even though Trump didn't go to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and the Trump team did not attend because they are thin-skinned and don't like to be roasted and wouldn't let there be comedians there, they used the White House Correspondents' Dinner to launch. And guess how much an annual membership fee is if you, just curious, checking the couches, the coins in your couch. $500,000 is the minimum fee to join, and you have to have referrals from existing members. So they're making it very clear that this is a power broker, tech executive, hedge fund, political influencers place, not a place where the media is going to wander in and accidentally overhear you making plans. It's not like a Signal chat room where they would let a reporter in. And but yeah, they're sending a very clear message. Governance is increasingly shaped by these private interests away from public scrutiny. So there you have it, the Billionaires Club.
It really is. It is really shocking, even by sort of Trump standards, I think is the wrong word, but Trump practices or Trumpy practices. And this Billionaires Club is also taking place in a landscape where Trump is pushing, his own sort of Bitcoin, dark money fundraising effort pre-inauguration and post, and this idea that we're going to have some sort of crypto reserve. But, I can't, you don't know this about me, Nadine, but whenever I think of Don Jr., I think I always pronounce him in my head Danger, like danger, because I can't get over it because when I was a kid, I think it was either Sesame Street or Electric Company, there was this sonic sort of program where they were sounding out the word danger, and it was like this big huge stone, and the guy is going Don, Dan, Don Gur, and then as soon as he says danger, the rock like falls on him, and so I always think of Danger. I always think of Don Jr. as
Wow.
danger in my head. And I just can't like, and I also, the other thing I think about when I think about Don Jr. is that movie with Michael Keaton, Multiplicity, where he makes copies of himself and like each copy is somehow worse. And so I just think this, I cannot believe this guy, this son of a Trump. In fact, oh, by the way, for a while there, and I think I'm still going to try again, I try to get people to stop saying son of a bitch and say son of a Trump, because I just think it's so much better.
It rolls off the tongue.
Son of a Trump.
Son of a Trump.
Son of a
Yeah,
Trump.
I'm on board. I'm on board with calling it Dodgy instead of Doge, and I'm on board with son of a Trump.
Excellent. Son of a Trump. Yeah, I mean, you know, the idea of this guy having, you know, his tentacles in this way to power in our country by virtue of his birth, of being the son of a Trump, is extraordinary. And this Billionaires Club, like you said, the idea that they're calling it the executive branch, it's so in your face. And then also the buddies who are the picture that the Politico ran was the man you mentioned, the banker, along with Danger, along with JD Vance, you know, in this big photo. And you know, this idea of attacking ESG, I just have to say, I would put this in historical context because for a long time, I've tracked the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC. And for, you know, now more than 30 years, they've had a resolution in opposition of socially responsible investing. So they totally oppose socially responsible investing because they say that somehow diminishes profits, even though socially responsible investing, you know, has other benefits and also, you know, can, you know, protect our planet and, you know, expand diversity. But when I looked into this insane, in my view, resolution against like the pre-ESG opposition, it was really about apartheid. So as soon as they lost the battle to defend the racial apartheid in South Africa, and Alex was at the forefront of that effort in the 1980s to defend investing in South Africa, as soon as they failed in that effort to defend the apartheid regime from people withdrawing their funds and stopping business and sanctions against South Africa, they switched to an opposition to socially responsible investing, which now, 30 years forward, has become morphed into this opposition to ESG investing and DEI. And we've seen some of these other big billionaire players like Leonard Leo, who now has his own $1 billion trust fund, not a billionaire, but in charge of a $1 billion trust fund, attacking ESG, attacking DEI. So it's the playbook. It's certainly the playbook of these guys, but it really is foul. It is a stench. It reeks for there to be this billionaire boys club or billionaire club in Washington that Danger, that son of a Trump, has spearheaded. Yeah.
Well, and I'm glad you brought in the apartheid angle. I just did an article on wideawakeamerica.org about the South African PayPal mafia and how much of that is playing into, you know, these names. You know, Elon Musk gets his money from his family money from emerald mining. Peter Thiel's family was uranium mining. You know, all of their wealth built on the exploitation and absolute lack of care whatsoever for what happened to the Black people on whose labor they built their wealth, and their absolute fury about socially responsible corporate practices turning against South Africa, right? So even the attack on U.S. aid, you can tie right back to this group of men shaped by apartheid South Africa, very explicitly going after all of the machinery that applied pressure for them to end that odious practice. So here we are once again. It's apartheid redux. Yeah. Well, I could spend a whole lot of time talking about the Billionaire Boys Club, but there's a lot more going on.
There is,
we
and my
yes,
alarm went off,
I
but
would.
it's on
It's so
silent mode.
gentle,
I have not yet mastered the
right?
technology, so,
Well, if we
um,
could, I would bring up a huge stopwatch, 60 minute style, right now,
yes.
as our segue to the next section,
All
which
right.
is quite literally about 60 minutes.
Yeah, 60 minutes. So it's been around for a long time, and a lot of people watch it. I watch it periodically, and do like different segments from time to time. I don't confess to be an every week 60 minutes viewer, but I am a fan of 60 minutes and their investigative journalism over many decades and the integrity that they have acted with in that journalism, and they have not flinched in response to Trump until apparently now there is flinching. And so, if in case you missed the story, there's sort of two stories. It's really three stories, but the two stories are that the longtime producer of 60 Minutes resigned. Resigned in April, earlier this month, and he resigned because he felt that he was no longer free to have journalistic independence to pursue the stories that they think are important. Bill Owens was the executive producer of that program. He was and remains so well regarded by the on-air personalities and the team of 60 Minutes. And so why did Bill Owens resign? Well, part of it is because many people may have lost this in the grand scheme of these past 6 or 7 months. Trump sued 60 Minutes for billions of dollars, claiming that the interview 60 Minutes did with Kamala Harris before the election was supposedly, cut and paste to try to make her look good, in particular on questions around Israel and the statements that she was making about trying to hold Israel accountable in the midst of the ongoing conflagration in Gaza and what was happening and is continuing to happen in the Middle East. 60 Minutes denied those. 60 Minutes and CBS denied that those allegations. They released the full transcript. You could show that Trump was completely out of line and making such claims. And 60 Minutes and CBS argued that to allow such an attack on the editorial decisions of a news network or a newspaper or an outlet would be an unprecedented intrusion and flagrant violation of the First Amendment freedom of the press. Which is right here in the handy dandy Constitution, freedom of the press. But in the meantime, Trump won the election. Trump was inaugurated as president, and in the third part of the story is that Paramount, which owns CBS, is in the middle of a merger, an attempt to merge with, I think, Skydance, and so you have this merger that's pending approval by the Trump administration, and so it seems as though there is some effort to curry favor with Trump, not antagonize him. CBS, Paramount, moved to dismiss the case. It hasn't been dismissed yet. There was some mediation going on apparently. And in the meantime, just this past Sunday, this was the second part of the story. I jumped around. Scott Pelley, one of the long-standing investigative journalists at CBS and for 60 Minutes, gave a closing statement for 60 Minutes about this issue, about Bill Owens stepping back from a role that he, held with such integrity, and the concerns that the many people in the network have about the independence of CBS because of Trump's pressure and because of this desire for this for this merger. Now, a couple of years ago, I was actually part of a Paramount documentary film, Rest in Power, the Trayvon Martin story. Had really positive views of Paramount. Paramount also has been the owner of one of my favorite series, Star Trek. I can do it with both hands because I'm just that kind of geek. And Star Trek actually has one of my favorite quotes from all of the episodes of all time, which is about the links in a chain. And so there was an episode with Captain Picard, and he's talking about censorship. And there's a trial happening on the Starship Enterprise, or I guess Star Trek Next Generation Enterprise, and what Picard says is that the first speech censored, the first thought forbidden, the first freedom denied, chains us all irrevocably. He says, with the first link, the chain is forged. And so I just thought, that is so appropriate for this question of what's happening with CBS, what's happening in the broader media landscape with this bullying by Trump. And just really appreciate your suggesting that we talk about this, Nadine. It's a really important story. It's not just about 60 Minutes or CBS or Paramount or Skydance. It's about, our First Amendment rights and what this authoritarian White House and this authoritarian person in the person of the president is attempting to do to intimidate the press. And we even saw that just the other day in the interview Trump did with the reporter from ABC News, in which he literally bullied the guy live in that interview to claim that Kilmar Abrigo Garcia had MS-13 on his fingers when he did not, when that was photoshopped, and the reporter attempted to call that out, and then Trump kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and then did this really slimy sort of mob boss thing, which I know Greg and LB have talked about many times, including most recently. But this mob boss thing where basically said, I basically tells the reporter, I plucked you from obscurity. I chose you for this interview. How dare you disrespect me by contradicting me? Just really 10 pot dictator sort of insecure, arrogant, bully nonsense. So anyway, that's my rant on CBS and these issues. So I don't know. What are your thoughts, Nadine?
Yeah. Well, you almost derailed us completely into a Star Trek Next Generation fan moment, because I remember that vividly. And it was the daughter of a well-respected jurist, and he quoted her father back to her in that beautiful takedown. If you haven't seen it, by all means watch it, because it is so relevant. And that moment where Trump is telling that reporter that it wasn't photoshopped, the MS-13, which was clearly photoshopped. Everyone acknowledges that it was photoshopped. It tells you just how much, is Trump just so in the dark and so handled that he actually thinks it's true, or does he not care? And he knows that this tactic of insisting, like he wouldn't move on. He wanted to make that man say a thing he knew not to be true. And what was instructive to me was not just that he was using this strategy, but in some ways, I know people have praised that reporter for kind of holding ground, but in ways he gave up on that ground. He didn't. He said, well, you know what? Agree to disagree. No, we're talking about facts. We're not talking about opinion. You don't agree to disagree about a fact. But the pressure that that was just a microcosm of exactly how he operates. Like, I'm going to insist that it's true. I'm going to ignore the facts. And you will either capitulate or I have put a target on you. I'm telling everybody that you are fair game. So I think one of the messages, and I love the quote from Star Trek, because there's a lot of people who do not pay attention when they are not the first target. Maybe they don't have a kid in school, so you don't care that they took a Richard Scarry book out of the library, or you think, well, that's something that I don't know a whole lot about, or maybe I don't care for that either, whatever that issue that's being censored. But they are sharpening their knives every single time, and they're coming for your neck, and it's just a matter of time. So we have to wake up and stand up, whether it is targeting campus protests. We're coming up on May 4th, the anniversary of Kent State, where National Guard opened fire on students, and the rhetoric that preceded that is the same rhetoric that we are hearing right now. So when Moms for Liberty is banning books in your schools, when you are watching media companies capitulate, I think that's why shows like the 5/8, our show, the reason behind me launching wideawakeamerica.org was because we are seeing far too many companies just give ground. and roll over. And people
Yeah.
want to hear in places where you're not going to do that. And 60 Minutes is why I wanted to become a journalist. It was,
Mm.
when you said 60 Minutes, that was about the brave journalists who will go anywhere. They'll go into a war zone. They will confront anybody, the chase to the car, all of that was what 60 Minutes epitomized, that no matter who you were, whether you were a head of state or a corrupt business person, 60 Minutes was willing to get in your face. And to see that being attacked and dismantled, it's it's really heartbreaking.
It really, really is. And, I can't help but think about the numerous stories on health issues that 60 Minutes has been part of, including during the first phase of the COVID pandemic and more. Um, and and the importance of truth telling in both journalism and science and medicine. And so I'm so excited, Nadine, about the guests that you've invited to the show, to our
Yeah.
third show. So I'll hand it back over to you to
Yes.
introduce them.
So I'll tell you, the author that we're going to bring up, she's the author of The Black Angels, which documents the history of Black nurses who cared for tuberculosis patients in New York during the tuberculosis epidemic. And these nurses, they played such a crucial role. The white nurses who had worked at this facility called Seaview, basically they said, we're not doing this. These are Black and brown immigrants. We can get better jobs. And so they recruited Black women from the South to come to Staten Island. And what is really interesting to me is that their efforts, first of all, their efforts were instrumental in developing the breakthrough on TB, but what they endured and the same issues that we went through in COVID and now we're seeing now with RFK in place are the same issues that the author documents. And right after we got, I reached out and I said, "Hey, can you be on the show?" And she confirmed. We got news of the first confirmed tuberculosis case at a high school in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So when I say that things have, come full circle, and that it could not be more timely, I think about that. And so I'm thrilled to invite on our show Maria Smilios, author of The Black Angels. Maria, welcome. Thrilled to
Thank you.
have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, I wish it wasn't so timely. I wish we weren't seeing so many parallels. But tell folks about the Black Angels. And full disclosure, my grandmother, part of how we connected is my
Mhm.
grandmother was a Black Angel. But tell people who they were and how you came to find their story. And then we can talk
Yes,
about the parallels between then and now.
I know it's so sad in a way that we've come to a moment in time when we're cycling backwards instead of cycling forwards, especially because they were instrumental in helping tuberculosis. I mean, it's a disease that's eradicable. So I'll tell you a little bit about these remarkable women. These were women who were in 1929 at Seaview Hospital. The white nurses, as Nadine mentioned, began quitting. And part of that was that white women at the time had many options for jobs that wouldn't kill them. So Seaview was left short staffed. It was the largest municipal sanatorium in New York City, and the predominant patient population were immigrants and African Americans from Harlem. These people were considered by the city, quote, immoral, uncouth, unprofessional, indigent consumptives. Second-class citizens sent to this woefully understaffed sanatorium on this island, 400 feet above sea level, to languish and die. This was a time when there was no antibiotics, nothing. It was just, they thought fresh air and sunshine. And I mean, no antibiotics for anything. And so when the nurses began leaving, the city had a choice: either staff the ailing hospital somehow or shut it down. If they shut it down, there would have been thousands of patients that would have converged on the city, spreading tuberculosis. So they decided what they were going to do was put out a call similar to the one that had called up sharecroppers and farmers from the South. And at the time, Black nurses could only work in Black hospitals. And so there were hundreds of them underemployed. And so the city put out a call and they offered them free pay, housing, a professional career, and as they saw it, a quote, rare opportunity to work in one of New York's municipal hospitals. A little fact here, only 4 of New York's 29 municipal hospitals were integrated at the time. And so these nurses came up because what they wanted most, as I say, was a professional career. And they wanted to rise above the math that said Black women could not have professional careers or own homes. And in their mind, they thought if we come up and do this job, we will be considered, we could buy homes and we will be considered equal. That's not what happened. So they came up and they spent decades working at this hospital with people. So TB is not many people know much about tuberculosis. I know it's in the news now. TB is a grievous disease. It's called consumption because it consumes you from the inside out. This is not, as I say, the microbe is beautifully rendered to torture and kill slowly. So they took care of people who were there. I saw medical cards that, said 800 days, 1,000 days, 3 straight years at Seaview. And eventually they became part of one of the most galvanizing moments in human history, the cure for tuberculosis. And so that's kind of the story in a nutshell. There's much more that happens. I would, really urge you to read the story. As Nadine said, her grandmother was one of these Black angels, and they were really a remarkable group of women who were erased from history for 80 years. There was a whole narrative about tuberculosis that had been crafted without them. And, now they're starting to be folded into that narrative, and it makes me really, really happy.
Well, to me, so much of that story is about the courage of those nurses and the humanity, where they noticed things about their patients that the white nurses hadn't, because they weren't reading to them, sitting at their bedsides, holding their hands, and they were able to see how the different drugs were interacting. And it made such a difference. And now here we are at a time where we've got the heads of government, health agencies talking about autism registries, and Florida just passed a ban on fluoride. And you have, parents of a child who's died of measles saying they still wouldn't have gotten her a vaccine, even if it could have saved her. How do you, what do you see as the parallels right now in this anti-science moment? These, people furious if you wear a face mask on a plane, all of this kind of anti-science. What did you see then that you think might be instructive to us now?
So it's I don't want to say it's funny that you mentioned the fluoride, because I was listening to RFK's idiotic statements about how fluoride makes kids stupid, which he made, I think, today. Because there's so many that come out every single day, you lose track of when he says that. But I was just listening to that, and I thought to myself, I don't want to say how have we arrived at this moment, because I feel that we have been working towards this collective idiocracy for a long time. There really are no parallels to the type of anti-science that we are seeing right now. Because, as I say, the people that lived during this time that had no medications, and the first real antibiotics came in 1943 and 44 during World War II, sulfa packets given to soldiers to put in wounds. And this became the kind of golden age for antibiotics. And then in 1955, you had the polio vaccine. There was anti-science then. The world was not perfect. People pushed back. When the diphtheria vaccine came out, parents were hesitant to give it because the first one didn't work very well, but they did it. You know why? Because they saw what these diseases did. 1 in 3 people in the turn of the 20th century had tuberculosis. Then it went to 1 in 7. This was a disease that stirred people's deepest fears. So did measles. So did polio. I don't think people understand polio is incurable. It is not, if you recover from measles, you're lucky. Polio, you're done. You're pretty much going to be disfigured for the rest of your life if you survive. And I think part of this is that people don't know history. They don't know what these diseases did. Part of it is this, willful ignorance this belief in anti-science that is kind of mind-boggling. We have drugs for these. It's proven that measles has saved tens of millions of lives, and we are going backwards in time. The parallels that I see are not so much with the anti-science. The parallels that I would say that I see is going to be how many people are going to die. That's really, and suffer needlessly, you know. And back then you could say, well, they were suffering needlessly because the disease was getting them and there were no drugs. Now they're going to suffer needlessly because they're banning the drugs.
Yeah, I mean, it is so extraordinary. And Maria, thank you so much for coming on and for putting your book out into the world. As you point out, this is an unprecedented moment in modern American history to have this dominance of sort of this anti-science, anti-common sense a regime, basically. The recklessness of putting someone like RFK Jr. At the helm of HHS is just, it's unfathomable that A, he would be selected and nominated, and B, anyone like him who has these extreme views where he embraces discredited science is somehow given not just the helm of that department, but also some sort of not mandate, but in essence, the power to remake our health law based on claims that have been repeatedly debunked. You know, the claims on fluoride from basically one study in Canada that was not replicable because it was a poorly constructed study that was in defiance of hundreds of other studies about fluoride. That's extraordinary. When I saw this happening, what I remembered immediately was from my work exposing the John Birch Society and how Charles Koch's father, Fred Koch, helped launch the John Birch Society, how Charles Koch helped fund and fuel the John Birch Society in the 1960s until 1967, was that the John Birch Society, which was a bunch of crackpots, people who believed they were picking up the McCarthy mantle to see communism everywhere, who claimed that Eisenhower was soft on communism, the leader, the former NATO leader, commander, and the president of the United States, to claim that the Supreme Court was communist, to claim basically everything was a communist plot, and including fluoride. And that was then parodied in Dr. Strangelove, and Nadine, I think, has the quote handy. But it really is extraordinary to see that fringe, nutty set of claims be embraced as policy in America in the year 2025. Nadine, do you have the quote? Do you want to share it?
Oh, yeah. You know what? I just encourage people to watch Dr. Strangelove. First of all, it's a great film, but also, I mean, it really was, Colonel Jack Ripper, who would go on and talk about fluoride as a communist plot and how they were coming after our precious fluids, our vital essence. And it was an absolute joke. But now we have RFK Jr. saying the same things with a straight face. And, and it's not a parody. But I think that part of what we're seeing right now is that we have been so successful at, in eradicating, and vaccines have been so successful that people have no memory. Like, it's their great grandparents. And RFK Jr. does indeed look like Colonel J. Ripper. That just adds to the irony of it. But yeah, we, and I guess perhaps we're going to have to see a lot more death and harm. But I think they are also quite fine. Just like with tuberculosis, wealthy people went and sat in Adirondack chairs in the mountains and got fresh air. And poor people, immigrants, Black and brown people, were stacked like cordwood in places like Seaview. And so I think there's even a quote somewhere in your book from the medical director who essentially says,
"Oh yeah, you want me to say that?"
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I do wanted to say one thing about that there are, thinking about it, there are probably two parallels that will come from this. Number one is when you talked about that autism registry, tuberculosis was a heavily stigmatizing disease. So that type of stigma, racializing a disease or not autism is not a disease, but racializing diseases and microbes has been around for a very long time. The idea that you want to create a registry for people with autism is going to do the same thing. It is along those same lines to stigmatize and ostracize and other. The quote that Nadine is talking about is in 1933, the president of hospitals held this big meeting in New York, and the nurses showed up. Some nurses from Seaview showed up, and one of the nurses was the head of what was called the incurable ward, and she stood up in front of city officials and supervisors and said, "Mr. President, why do you send Black nurses to Seaview?" And he said, quote, "The reason we send Black nurses to Seaview is because in 20 years we won't have a colored problem in America because they'll all be dead from tuberculosis." The redeeming part of the book is that they don't die. Instead, they do something that is so, one in a million moment. The unredeemable part is the idea that these women were just as expendable as the people he sent there to languish and die. And that, in a nutshell, is what he is hoping to do, with saying people who are on, antidepressants are going to go to wellness camps, and he's going to go down the list, all kids with IEPs, that they're dismantling, the Board of Education departments that deal with children who have 504s or IEPs, kids who have like ADHD, ADD, or any kind of neurodiversity. That's what they're doing. So if you are not a white Christian male who probably has money, you're going to find yourself in some category. And one of the things that we can take away from this story is that if you don't think it can happen to you, disease doesn't care. It doesn't care who you are. It will happen. In time, it will happen because the rapid untying of the whole healthcare system of America, I'm talking about in terms of vaccines and drugs that were used to mitigate diseases, is happening so fast that there's no way you're going to put a cap on it. The rate of TB spreading in this country right now is almost unprecedented. Like it's just kind of astonishing to sit back and watch this happen.
Unbelievable. And it does come for everyone. I think of Herman Cain, the Godfather pizza guy, bragging about being unvaccinated in crowds. And
I remember him, the
right,
999 guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I haven't heard his name in a long, long time.
Yeah. And the research showed that the death rate among Republicans was actually higher because they were buying all of this. But as you say, we're all in this boat together, and they put themselves at risk and therefore put us all at risk. And it really is tragic. When you said that quote, I just felt my blood boil all over again. My father would tell the story of my grandmother coming home on the bus, sitting by herself. Nobody, she worked the late shift, and he would walk her from the bus stop, but couldn't get close, couldn't hold her hand. She would take all of her clothes and wash them immediately, shower before she would let any of the kids hug her. And there were, as you said in the book, that there were times when they would not let them wear masks.
Yeah, the supervisor believed the supervisor was this Teutonic white woman who was the daughter of a Confederate medic, and she was a product of her time. And she believed she wasn't trained to wear masks. She came from one of the top infectious disease hospitals in the country. And she said, specifically, she would stalk the hallways to catch the Black nurses doing something wrong. And she said, masks make the nurses complacent. And she said they ball them up, they put them in their pocket. It wasn't disposable masks. It was these cloth gauze face coverings, whatever you want to call them. They were kind of the first masks that people wore, even though the studies were coming out that nurses who work with tuberculosis were at a higher risk of getting the disease, but a mask did prevent the spread. She didn't let them do that. So
she sounds like Nurse Ratched.
The nurses said, Miss Mitchell had a quote, gaze that could freeze the devil himself. She was completely like Nurse Ratched. But yeah, I mean, this is a story, in the end, I just, I feel like there's so much that we get pulled down and dragged down, but this book in particular, it is a story of triumph, and it is a story that gives us hope that there will always be people to take care of us, like Nadine's, grandmother, and all these other women who rose to these occasions. They did it again during COVID. But let's remember who these people were. These were Black and brown women who put their bodies on the line for us. And, that we keep asking them to do this is problematic, because the healthcare system is so stretched thin that there's not going to be, that's another thing, when you start reading the way nurses are being abused, there's not going to be anyone to take care of us when we get sick. It will happen. And I hate to say that so definitively, unless you have vaccines and you're fortunate enough to be vaccinated against measles, but there's no vaccine for TB. So that's a kind of roll of the dice.
Maria, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for uncovering this history and telling it so powerfully. How can people stay in touch with you?
They can go to my website, mariasmilios.com. There's my email is there. Feel free to reach out. Or follow me on social media. Thank you so much for having me. Have a great night. And
you too. You take care.
Talk soon. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Wow.
Whew.
That was so powerful. So powerful. I'm going to assert a little bit of hope in spite of, I think the things Maria said in terms of the challenges that we're facing and the risks of these diseases and the triumph of stupidity in the form of RFK's edicts. I have some hope that people are seeing more clearly how extreme this is, what's happening with this administration. I have some hope that more and more people are waking up to understand the risks that this administration, the recklessness of this administration in so many ways. And that does lead us right to our fourth topic, which I've titled 144,000 minutes, which is the number of minutes in 100 days. And I did do it because it reminded me of the Rent song, 525,600 minutes. It's been 144,000 and way too many minutes of chaos over these past 100 days. And I am glad to see the polls starting to move in some significant ways to show that people are waking up and are more and more concerned. The idea that Trump has or had a mandate is also just one of the myths that he's perpetuated, because, as I think we talked about in the first show, the fact is that when you look at all the people who voted in the 2024 election, more people voted for someone other than him than for him by, a number of million. Now, and he did, beat Kamala Harris under the tally, the final tally of the election, the official tally of the election, but it was close. There was no mandate for this type of extremism in so many ways. And certainly the tariff issue continues to have a lot of fallout. I mean, first of all, like a year ago, I would say a little more than a year ago, I was talking with the New York Times magazine about this administration, the future administration, if Trump were to win, and impose the types of tariffs that the Project 2025 agenda of the Heritage Foundation was urging, that it would be an absolutely destructive act for the American economy, which, was growing in some ways in the aftermath of that first phase of the pandemic, but was still suffering and is still suffering from these completely grotesque, distorted policies that were initiated under Ronald Reagan to cut the tax rates on the richest people. And one of the things that Trump did in that first administration was this massive tax cut, which Charles Koch, the billionaire I mentioned before, called a once-in-a-generation opportunity to basically cut his taxes and the taxes on his billionaire children and his billionaire buddies. And so, the economy, our economy, the U.S. economy has really struggled under what some people call neoliberal policy or sort of this policy of the past 40 years, which has allowed the richest few to continue to enrich themselves while Americans work harder and harder for less real dollars while everything else goes up, rent goes up, not just eggs, but all the things that people have to spend money on to survive, let alone thrive, have increased dramatically. But for the billionaires, it doesn't matter. And so that tariff announcement that Trump did a few weeks ago was insane. If there are history books or the equivalent written about this period in the future, like him in the Rose Garden with this half-assed, ridiculous concoction of a tariff policy based on trade deficits, not based on anything in reality, and a policy of imposing ridiculous, irrational, capricious, arbitrary penalties, basically, on goods coming in the United States, where we, the consumers, pay those costs, not the country, despite Trump's repeated lies about the countries paying the tariffs, and omitting North Korea, Russia from the tariffs, like two pariah nations that Trump has kissed up to the dictatorial leaders of, because that's who he's really a fanboy of. And yet putting a tariff on a penguin island, like literally the tariff thing is it is literally one of the single most destructive economic things. I think it probably is the most destructive economic thing any president in the history of the United States has ever done. And that's not all, right? We're seeing all these other terrible policies, this destruction, disrespect for the idea of due process, just utterly stupid, mendacious nonsense attacking references to diversity and race and equality in our public institutions, on public websites. This new recent effort to target the Smithsonian for supposedly promoting an insane history, which is actually the accurate history of the United States, one that Trump and Vance apparently want to whitewash, literally whitewash, in their own way. I mean, this 100 days, this 144,000 minutes has been in like dog years, like a million minutes of these. I don't know. Can I say fuckers? Like I literally, I cannot believe these sons of Trump and Trump have done this to us. But the bright spot is more and more people are literally saying, I'm going to curse again, are saying, what the fuck? My vision is for there to be like, Trump did this, little stickers all over everything, every price, every gas station thing, we'll get to that in a second. But like, I really want more and more people to see in their daily lives, first of all, the egg price, which was a complete illusion to blame Biden and Kamala Harris for that has gone up because because Trump doesn't care about it, and because presidents don't actually control the price of eggs, and because we have other issues in terms of big ag in this country and bird flu and all that sort of stuff. But like that's the least of it. The bulk of it is just completely destructive policies that hurt ordinary American people, every economic class except for the billionaires who are busy kissing up to him when they have the billions that they could use to actually fight this guy, but they're cowards and they're craven. So yeah, first 100 days, big thumbs down in the form of the old film production, not a thumbs up. Would like no stars, would not recommend. And also, maybe there are these little sparks and glimmers we're seeing in people coming out to demonstrate. We're seeing in these town halls. We're seeing show up in the polls. And on this issue of kids and this disregard for kids of different abilities, I think we're going to see an uprising by parents in reaction to this assault on education. So anyway, that's my opening.
No, absolutely. First of all, I think craven and coward should have been what they called the Billionaires Club.
Yes.
But I think that you're
like the 3 Cs. Yeah. Yeah.
I think you're right. It is a world in which I find myself agreeing with Dave Portnoy from the Barstool Sports, where Trump wrote, "This is Biden's stock market, not Trump's." After the volatility, the cratering that was caused by tariffs, and Portnoy is a big Trumper, right wing guy, and he responded to Trump saying, "What's that old expression? Don't piss down my back and tell me it's raining." Well, that applies here. The stock market is a direct reflection of Trump's first 100 days in office. Doesn't mean it won't get better and that we don't need to be patient, but this is his market, not Biden's. So I do think that we are seeing people, begin to say, "Listen, I'm not going to be bullied into saying the lie that you keep saying over and over again." And when his most staunch supporters are willing to question him in public, which is verboten in Trump land, that there is reason for hope. Unfortunately, there are far too many still willing to bend the knee or bend whatever in response to Trump applying pressure. And one of those is Jeff Bezos. And Jeff Bezos has bent, right? So
Yep.
Amazon basically, they said they were going to break new ground in price transparency this week. They said they were considering labeling products with specific price increases caused by Trump's tariffs, right? So you could, if you were buying something, you'd see precisely how much more expensive it was because of Trump's tariffs. And that would have, been just the kind of thing, right, to alert everyday consumers to the impact that he was having on their daily, pocketbook. Because, there are places we're paying 145% tariffs on Chinese imports, right?
Yeah.
And that accounts for 70% of Amazon's inventory. So this approach would have mirrored actions that have already been taken by like Temu and Shine and Hermes and Ferrari, all of which are now explicitly listing or attributing U.S. price hikes to Trump's tariffs. But the moment that he got word of Amazon's price, the White House lashed out, called it a hostile and political act. To tell the American consumers the truth is a hostile and political act in this world. And apparently, Trump phoned Bezos directly. And of course, within hours, Amazon reversed course, stating that the idea was never officially approved and wouldn't be implemented. And Trump praised Bezos for solving the problem very quickly and doing the right thing, even calling him a good guy. Right. So anyway, this is I could have done an impression just then, but there's not enough hot water in St. Petersburg for me to scrub the awful feeling of doing that. So and I don't even know what Jeff Bezos' voice sounds like, so I couldn't have done that one. But yeah, this is direct political pressure from the White House on a business to keep consumers in the dark, to hide the fact that he is costing us billions in these in these tariffs that we pay. And we have seen Bezos donate $1 million to Trump's inauguration, dining at Mar-a-Lago. The Washington Post, owned by Bezos, has now did not endorse in 2024, overrode their editorial team and basically gave their top editor an ultimatum that he basically just be a cheerleader for all of the excesses of capitalism or move on. So it's not completely surprising, but here we are in a world where telling the truth to consumers is considered a dastardly political act by this White House.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that telling the truth is an act of hostility, is a hostile act. I mean, that was just so telling. It really is extraordinary, and that's how they view it. Truth is hostile to them. Whether it's the truth in the Smithsonian Museum, whether it's the truth of the contributions of Black soldiers, of women in the service, like anything that somehow contradicts their worldview is hostile and political, versus just the actual truth that they, as I mentioned last week, they can't handle the truth. They don't want the truth. And Bezos caving. I was trying to get Nadine, for our viewers. I was trying to get Nadine to say Bezos cavesos, but it was a little too cute by half. But I at one point a few months ago, I looked more into Bezos because I hadn't really studied him that closely, and I sort of, my impression is he's sort of stuck in time. as a 17 or 18-year-old, he gave some speech about his vision for living off the planet. This is, sort of a weird obsession ties Musk and Bezos together. This idea that they think, notwithstanding the actual science being against them, that they have some master plan to live outside of the Earth's atmosphere and, colonize the world. But there was
I would
Bezos
donate
as
to
a-
that fund. I would donate to the
I know.
fund that removes them from the
I would
planet.
donate to a fund, to send the billionaires to Mars. Yeah, please.
As long as
I
it
would donate
was
to that.
more than the 10-minute Blue Origin flight. As long as it's
Yeah.
more than that.
Yeah. I mean, but on the one hand, I don't want to piss on someone's dreams from when they were 17 that they wanted space travel or something, but also like it seems as though he is willing to sell the soul of the Washington Post in terms of its editorial independence, which, the Post had done a tremendously good job during the first Trump administration, cataloging the lies, just the thousands of lies that Trump told. Its editorial cartoonists were free to criticize Trump. Ann Telnay, one of the great editorial cartoonists of our lifetime, resigned after her editorial cartoon about Bezos bending the knee to Trump was canned by the right-wing editor who was a former, a Murdoch guy who Bezos hired to basically manage the operation a few years ago at the Post, and then has increased his, power over it. And as you point out, they engaged in absolute cowardice in refusing to follow the independent judgment of the editorial board to endorse Kamala Harris because of the risk to the rule of law, to justice that Trump posed if he returned to power, which we've seen unfold. But I just think, clearly Bezos is counting on his space travel to be, I guess, his legacy, and wants to curry favor with his administration in order to pursue that. And I actually think NASA and our space industry should be a public entity, should not be funded by billionaires, should not be outsourced to billionaires, no matter what their political party is. And I also think there was actually a really important poem, and I wish that I could remember it off the top of my head, but I'll post it in the thing after. But it was about space travel in the 1960s, and it's an African American young man, in the voice of an African American young man, saying Whitey went to the moon, but here we are in the U.S. without having access to services and the types of things that make our society great. But great. And now I am in awe of the moon landing, but I take that point when we have real serious issues for our people in this country and around the world with USAID, where we could be spending money investing in disease prevention, investing in expanding education, but instead we're giving away contracts to billionaire dudes whose ambition is to colonize like the moon or Mars. What a fucking waste of money.
Well, this goes back to the first 100 days, because, what I think it's really important to remember that what they are doing, all of these erratic tariffs are on, tariffs are off, tariffs are high on this country, low on this country. It's a shakedown. This is how mobsters act. Hey, Vietnam, you want to get a better tariff deal? My buddy Elon over here would like a $38 billion Starlink contract with you, or, you going to play ball with me or not? And what it should be called 101 days, because the day before he took office, Trump launched a meme coin, which is a coin of no value except by reputation, right? It's like a pet rock. Its value is only what value you put in it. But he launched it at his pre-inauguration party, which meant everybody in that room was basically given access to the inside track of a Ponzi scheme, of a scam.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
this thing suddenly starts taking off. All of the crypto folk that have been turning towards Trump because he promised to be the biggest crypto guy that the nation had ever seen, suddenly jump on, and basically overnight, billions raised by this meme coin, and then it drops as fast as a pet rock. And this is, part of the audacity of Trump is to steal in broad daylight, to commit his crimes in broad daylight in a way that is intended to make people go, well, if he was doing anything wrong, he wouldn't be so brazen. No, that's the play. And this is always a follow the money moment. And, Bezos is making he's weighing the benefits of being on the inner circle and the benefits of, relinquishing the information that should be made public in order to appease. The one thing that is really fascinating to me is that, there's no honor among billionaires, because as Elon Musk has become this lightning rod and Tesla's stock and earnings are cratering, Bezos rolls out a new electric truck called Slate Auto to go after the Tesla market while they are floundering. I think the chair of their board just sold the last 30 million of her stock, but I do hold out some hope that their greed and their arrogance will begin to have a corrosive effect, but that alone won't do it. It's going to take people power, and I think people power is how we end up with our glass half full tonight.
Yes.
Yes. So before we go, as always, we end with the glass half full. And on this week, we lift our glasses and honor the good folks of Canada, where Mark Carney's Liberal Party has won the race. And these results, cheers, oh Canada. I'll just have a little sip here. What's amazing is that before Trump, the Trump of Canada was up by somewhere between 20 and 25 points, right? And Trump is so unpopular right now. His numbers are cratering so much in the U.S. that he's losing elections in other countries. And that is what has happened here. He has galvanized the Canadian people, elbows out Canada as a t-shirt. I want the t-shirt. The number of, I'm in Florida. So when Canadians say, screw you, America, we're not coming, they're not coming here. There are places where the news is Canadians are selling their homes. They're inviting good Americans, the good people of America, come visit us. But right now it is too hostile for us to visit the U.S. And the president has, the insult, the arrogance. And Carney's very first speech was basically to say, the old way is over. Whatever affections have, and history binds us, there's a new Canada emerging from this, and we will never allow ourselves to be reliant on the U.S. again. And, and a defiant call to the nation to reject the implication by Trump that Canada should be the 51st state and not treated as a sovereign nation. So, Canada has shown us what happens when, in the face of Trumpism, instead of capitulating, instead of being fearful, people get angry and people fight back, and they have claimed their country. And I think it sends a message to Americans that we can do the same here.
Yes. So, and Pierre Poilievre, the conservative leader who was, as you said, 20 points up, not only lost, like the conservatives not only lost, but he lost his seat. And so, like, Trump uniting people elsewhere is really an extraordinary thing. And more people are being united here. So that's it. The glass is half full. Episode 3 done, and looking forward to seeing you all next Wednesday. And also, please go to the Friday Night Hang with Greg and LB on the 5/8 this Friday. So thank you all for joining us, and hope you have a next few days before you get your next infusion from the 5/8.